You're listening to Making the Cut, the mostly true life story of a retired surgeon from 1C Productions.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Seitz, founder and president of 1C Productions. This episode contains explicit language and adult content. It is intended for mature audiences only.
I had the good fortune of enjoying tutelage under Professor Pilcher for a couple of months when the opportunity came to become his locum, his temporary house officer.
A few weeks into the rotation, the house officer, the unit's man Friday, took his 2-week mandatory holiday.
Perhaps, Dr. McGee, you would be interested in applying for the position?
I would be delighted to serve you and care for your patients, Professor Pilcher. My mentor had not only noticed me, he believed I could step up to additional responsibilities. At last, a male mentor who not only wanted good for me, but also provided suggestion for how I might achieve that good. Being temporary house officer presented a great learning opportunity. We rode in the lift together, something I'd not been able to do before as I did not have seniority to allow such, to the theater.
Dr. McGee, this is Sister and her charge nurse. This will be your locker.
I felt the honor of being treated like a son. My newly assigned unit pager allowed all and sundry who wanted something done or had a logistical problem to get a hold of me. I was at everyone's disposal, at the cost of my freedom. Would Victoria understand my time investment? Since one of the surgical dictums is shit flows downhill, I was paged almost constantly to solve all manner of problems related to my 30 patients. Shackled to my pager, I answered concerns from relatives, commands from nurses, calls to outpatient clinics, and to the operating theater. In between, I removed sutures, started IVs, inserted nasogastric tubes, discharged patients, digitally disimpacted constipated patients, and worked down the endless scud list of countless instructions given to me at rounds. I responded to all calls. I prescribed meds for pain, sleep, constipation, and I wrote daily progress notes. I wolfed down dinner. When the time allowed, I read up on new surgical procedures in preparation for next day's surgery, hoping I'd be allowed to operate despite lacking my primary fellowship. And that actually happened on my on-call days. It wasn't unusual that I had to first assist with an emergency operation late into the night, fighting hunger and fatigue, then snatching some sleep, before starting the next day's operating schedule and work routine. On slower days and slow weekends, I had the luxury of a cup of tea and a biscuit at 4 p.m., with a leisurely glance at the newspapers, fighting fatigue and resisting the temptation to nod off while sinking into the deep sofa of the common room. My new room in the house officer's quarters at University Street put me in quick walking distance to the ward, theater, and casualty via connecting underground tunnel. It was a small but comfortable room on the 4th floor with a sizable southeast window and a sink. I quickly fell into a habit of an early bath or nap and joining my fellow surgeons and physicians at 8 o'clock dinner. Senior house staff sat at the high table and were served first, and then the remaining staff was served dinner by middle-aged Irish grandmother types who addressed everyone as love. Small talk was the rule. War stories or requests for consultations to see other patients and render an opinion. Fearing an emergency would rob me of further sleep, I often excused myself and skipped dessert, climbing up to my room and dropping into bed, exhausted. Wives, fiancés, and girlfriends were prohibited from entering the house officer's living quarters. They could not partake in the communal dinner or have a cup of tea while reading the papers in the common room, waiting for their man, and they most certainly could not spend a night or weekend. Seeing Victoria was deferred to my night off duty, when I generally got home sleep-deprived and exhausted, but sufficiently alive to focus on a chit-chat which usually ended by moments of tenderness and cuddling. I could not believe the building rule disallowing females. Although initially amused by this arcane rule, I quickly became enraged at the tyrannical dominance. There would be no women to talk to about the shock of seeing the sick or injured? Would no female sensibilities placate the injustices of surgical hierarchy? Were we doctors to be denied the necessary affection and sense of comfort a woman could offer us? How was I going to maintain my relationship with Victoria when I had so little chance of seeing her? Had any of us signed up for such a monastic life? Tentative inquiries concerning the reason women were not allowed were met with astonished stares.
Don't you know?
No.
No one told you?
No.
Well, it's rumoured it was Sir Max's decision. His mama apparently wants her son to marry a nice Jewish girl. She doesn't approve of his companion, the sister, on the medical ward, who is Church of England.
Yes, I've met her. However, I was sceptical of the rumour.
Well, if Sir Max is to have no fun, then no one is to have any fun. Do you get it?
I did. I respected the cultural and religious objections attributed to his mother, similar to Egyptian traditions. The tunnels under London's busy streets conveniently connected the three buildings, and I suspected that the unusually dim lighting in the entrance hall at the University Street entrance to the doctor's quarters was no accident. An elderly beadle wearing bulky hearing aids stood guard at the entry. He was deafened by the long night of the thundering artillery barrage as a sapper during the Battle of El Alamein in Egypt. With his attention willfully focused in front of him, eyeing the lively goings-on at the Wellington, he deftly avoided seeing the young women emerge like cockroaches from the tunnel behind him and quietly ascend the stairs to their waiting lovers as dusk transitioned to darkness. When I pressed him, pushing a refill of another pint while we propped up the bar at the Wellington after his nth pint of bitter, he confessed.
They pop up from the underground passages and disappear behind my back. I swear, I never see or hear them.
At 7 each morning, a cheerful maid knocked on my door.
Would you like 1 cup of tea or 2?
2 teas, please, resulted in a cracked open door, through which I received a tray with 2 cups of tea, a small pot of milk, and 2 biscuits. The service was thoughtful. Except by 7 a.m., most nurses and medical sweethearts had descended into London's subterranean tunnels, off to start their shifts. Professor Pilcher's expectations of me as his house officer were the same as when I was a student, although my perspective as an insider had changed. In the morning before surgery, as we walked between beds, he chatted quietly in a convivial tone with his staff. His decisions were definitive, yet conveyed an air of humility.
The more you see, the less black and white a case becomes.
Unlike Sir Max, I suspected Professor Pilcher did not seek the limelight or eminence. His reward was the trust and privilege of operating on his patients. I was responsible for all the admissions, making a point of clerking every one, so I knew their problems before the operating schedule. I wrote up my notes, drew the pre-op blood tests, chest x-rays, EKGs, and obtained the operative consents. With the aid of a cheat sheet, I ordered the appropriate number of blood units to be cross-matched for the operation, each procedure requiring a different amount. On Professor Pilcher's elective cases, he expected to find the chest x-rays on the viewing box for his review when he entered the operating room bright and early. I retrieved these films from the radiology department the night before surgery. My habit irritated the radiologist, who could not find them to dictate a report the next morning. Professor took me aside to teach me a systematic way to read my patient's chest x-rays. We worked within the limits of the disease that we saw in the chest x-rays. One day, halfway through the 2-week locum, Professor Pilcher told me, between operative cases,
I'm an old-time TB surgeon. I first started cutting in 1930. The advent of the anti-TB drug streptomycin means that medication, rather than my scalpel, will cure patients in the future.
His face showed a moment of sadness.
I'm as dead as a dodo. Just good timing, because I'm retiring.
He did not say when. I did not understand. To me, he was a surgeon despite the march of progress. The thought that medical advancement could make a highly skilled person obsolete seemed unfathomable. Was this going to happen to me someday? Lunchtime on the ward was a prized moment. When the food trolley appeared shortly before noon, able patients rose from their beds and took seats at the long dining table placed in the center of the ward. The communal meal enhanced patients' appetites, encouraged them to socialize with one another, and quietly allowed them to compare their condition to their neighbors, perhaps concluding they were not that badly off after all. After lunch, Professor Pilcher, Sister, and I did work rounds. We stood at the bed of a sick and emaciated patient who suffered from cancer. To ease his severe pain, he was regularly given an elixir called Brompton cocktail. This potent concoction consisted of morphine, heroin, cocaine, gin, and chloroform water, an English idiosyncrasy. I tried to impress the professor by saying that I had started the patient on penicillin because he had developed aspiration pneumonia. I was proud that I had showed some initiative. As we moved toward the next bed, he stopped me and gently placed his hand on my arm.
Wouldn't it be kinder to let this patient slip quietly away due to his pneumonia, given that he has an inoperable cancer of the esophagus?
I cancelled my order. 4 days later, the elderly man died peacefully in his sleep. I resolved to never forget the lesson. Do not treat the disease. Instead, treat the patient with compassion and common sense in the context of the disease. I met with Professor Pilcher twice in his modest office at the top of the medical school. We talked more like father to son rather than professor to student.
When you are a surgeon, you must view not only the X-ray films, but also the pathology slides of all tissues removed from a patient. Do not rely on the written report.
He produced a few tissue slides of fixed lung cancer and a well-used microscope. Peering through the lens at the slide, he pointed out the characteristics of the Indian file arrangements of the cells defining the most common type of lung cancer: squamous cell.
A successful operation is one where the resected edge of the specimen, the surgical margins, are well clear of the disease. Look.
I peered down through the microscope lens and appreciated what he was trying to teach me.
Have a seat. Since you want to become a surgeon, let me share with you the criteria that should be used when judging surgical outcome, errors, and deaths. To my mind, that is the sine qua non of surgery. The first is error in diagnosis. If one makes the wrong diagnosis, it is likely that the wrong treatment or operation will be done. Do you follow?
Yes, sir.
The second is error in management, which is quite common. As a result, the inappropriate treatment is given so that the patient is mismanaged and may die. I hope you haven't witnessed these two errors on our unit.
Oh, no, sir.
The next error is subtle and often not seen by young surgeons. This is error in judgment. Here the surgeon misjudges the many aspects of surgical care. This is usually at operation and in the management of the patient after operation. This is not something a junior surgeon can do much about except tactfully bring it to the attention to the head of the unit. and that too is at times difficult. But eventually, it becomes known since errors in judgment are recurrent with the same surgeon. And lastly, of course, is what we all agree upon is the patient's disease. No matter what treatment is given, the patient dies. Their time is up, and the Almighty is calling them to his fold.
I understand.
Best to avoid operating on these types of patients, and depending what they have, just make them comfortable.
He rose and headed toward a stack of medical journals.
Have you ever heard of Professor Robert McWhirter's work?
No.
He's a friend of mine, a very clever man. He is the Forbes Professor of Medical Radiology at the University of Edinburgh.
He indicated the northerly direction with his hand.
He has some interesting results concerning women with breast cancer. Instead of the standard operation of radical mastectomy, where a woman's chest is grossly deformed, Professor McWhirter's results show an equal 5-year survival rate for simple mastectomy and radiation therapy, a procedure that preserves a woman's breast, female form, and her dignity. The results are published in the British Medical Journal and are convincing. Many surgeons, though, have refuted his methods. Here it is. Makes interesting reading.
I took his offering, feeling he was sharing a secret. I had seen a radical mastectomy, which was akin to an amputation of a woman's chest wall. The diseased breast, all the underlying muscles and the lymph nodes were cut out. The thought was that the more tissue that was removed, the greater chance for a woman's survival. But the procedure was grotesque. Professor Pilcher was telling me of a less deforming approach. This appealed to me. I hated deforming a woman's figure in any way. Was he taking me under his wing?
I would eventually discover Professor Pilcher's advice regarding lumpectomies rather than mastectomies to be one of the most profound pieces of information that he shared with me. It would influence my life's work. Looking back, I realized I was insufficiently confident to truly develop a student-mentor relationship with him, which, in retrospect, I would have loved. Despite our cordial relationship, the feeling of a lowly student intern persisted in me. My unresolved relationships with my father prevented me from understanding and participating in the mutual benefits of mentorship. I eventually learned that Professor Pilcher expected to retire around the time I would be graduating. His perceived successor was Mr. Hart, a man who would give me an altogether different experience.
Thanks for listening to this project from 1C Productions, where thought-provoking media comes alive. Be sure to check out other 1C shows like Freevangelic, in which a married couple discuss their walk out of lifelong evangelicalism and into a new way of being. Their search for truth might open doors for you as well. Learn about Freevangelic and other 1C Productions podcasts at just1c.com. That's JUSTONEC.com.
You've been listening to Making the Cut from 1C Productions. Making the Cut was written, produced, and directed by Rebecca Seitz, based on Michael McGead's manuscript, Mastering the Knife. Noah James played Michael McGead. Other roles were brought to life by the voice talent of Jason Drew, James Smiley, Christine McGuire, and David Marcus. Audio engineering provided by Zisher LLC. Making the Cut theme music by Kyle J. Baker. Learn more at makingthecutpodcast.com.